Right. So today we're going to be exploring some more of the functional programming offered by Java. And I'm just going to open the file we worked with last time, which was basic Java, I believe. Was the HTML document. Okay, yeah. So, and my Java code.js. So let me just go open that too. My Java code. Right. So
So this all has to be done in the script, right? Under the script tag.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Like we have to start the JavaScript within the script tag, right? It can be within the head or the body.
Yeah, the script tag can be at the bottom or it could be at the top. I mean, it's basically, it's just a good practice to keep all your things separate. And another thing to note here is that when your browser loads the HTML content, what really happens is that it starts from the top and reads line by line as it goes to the bottom. So this part where it says script source my Java code.js, this particular line is loaded before anything gets drawn on the screen.
Yeah.
So if you refer to our previous example, so I'm just gonna do this one, a quick one, just to show
So
you.
could you just show that? Could you just show that line again, the external one?
Yeah, it's right here.
Script.
Yeah, it's just you just add src equals to, in quotations, the name of the JS file, and that's all you have to do.
Okay.
Right. So as I was saying that, just to make you understand that how this actually works is if you go into your Java code, and I'm just going to put up an alert here, right? And just save that, and get back to my code. Now, now basically I'm drawing an H1 heading over here, and I'm also drawing a button on the screen. But when I execute my code of basic Java, okay, first I got to locate where the folder is. My desktop's a big mess. Right, there you go, basic Java. Okay, now looking at this, you can see that the alert box is up and running, but nothing's happened at the back. The screen's still blank until I click the alert, and then I get to my counter, right? So what this tells you is that the HTML content or the HTML code is read line by line from top to bottom. Okay, this is something you need to know. I'm gonna get rid of the alert. And by the way, we did finish making the counter last time, right?
No, sir. Like it didn't try to make it, but it didn't work.
The counter was not working last time?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's see what the problem is. Okay, so on click equals, I'm calling a function called count, and the function count is right here. I've got the counter variable, which I am adding. Counter equals counter plus 1. And document.query selector.
So won't it be counter plus this?
Yeah, that you could do it either way. You could do it like this, or yeah, I mean both ways are fine. This is like the very basic way of doing it. So I'm just gonna remove that one now if you don't want it. Query selector counter dot inner HTML equals to the variable counter. Yeah, okay.
So what was document.query selector used for?
Yeah, document. See, with this keyword document, this is actually referring to the DOM model, right? The document object model. So anything that you want to manipulate using the DOM model from JavaScript, you must use the document keyword, followed by a dot operator, and then followed by the property that you want to retrieve using the document model. So in this case, we are
Alright.
just trying to retrieve an element using the query selector, and we've given the name for that element is counter. The counter is basically the H1 tag whose ID we've already specified as counter. Okay.
So
yeah.
this and document of get element by ID have a similar function, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So I thought we had done this, but if you're saying we hadn't done it, so that's fine. So this is the counter. When you click, basically what's happening is it's going, first of all, it's calling the count function, the button over here. It calls the count function. The count function then, initially we've initialized a variable called counter with 0, and the function count increments counter by 1. So this 0 gets added by by a 1, so that becomes 1. And finally, what we do is, we tried this with the alert, but that doesn't look nice at all. So we wanted the heading H1 to have the new counter values. And in order to assign those values, we ran this function, which was document.querySelector, and we picked the H1 tag, which had an ID of counter. And we changed its properties of inner HTML to the value of the counter variable.
So why do you have a hash over there?
When you're referring to elements, you need to use the hashtag.
So we didn't use that before.
With button or with the H1, you need to use it. Without it, it will not work. Let me try without it. I don't think it will work without it. So because it's an ID, so when you're calling on the ID and you're inside a function, you need to use the hashtag. It's very similar. Like if it were a class, then this would probably have been a dot. But since it's a selector, an ID,
Okay.
so we're using the hashtag. So any questions?
Yes, sir. Could you just show me the basic Java file?
The basic Java file. There you go.
So we assign the H1 and ID of counter.
Yeah.
Button on click.
And I've just placed the 0 in there just to show, just as a starting value.
All right. And then when you just hit the button, it places 0 with the new counter value. That's where the HTML comes in, right?
Your voice was breaking. Could you just say that again, please?
When you click the button, the 0 is replaced with the new value of counter. And that is performed by the .inner HTML function, right? Part of the function.
Yes, yes. So whatever the content inside this H1 is, it's actually changed using the document.get element, the get query element, and get the document.query selector, and we specify the ID here of that particular element, and we apply the changes to its attributes using .inner HTML.
Okay.
Okay, is it clear? Can we move on?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, all this looks good, but what if I don't want to use the on-click event here? Now, if I don't want to specify an event listener in my HTML code, what if I want to do all of this using my programming?
What do you mean?
So yeah, what I mean is that right now I'm using on-click equals count. I'm specifying which function gets called when the on-click event occurs. But since Java allows us to modify the elements using the DOM model, why not keep all my on-click events and codes separate in the file and not interfere with the HTML content?
I don't get that.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't want to specify that what this button will do, right? And as a matter of fact, if I do go in the background, right now the button's there, but obviously I haven't defined the event. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to define that event in my Java file. And one way of doing that is I could simply say document. Okay, can you tell me what I'd have to do before I tell you what needs to be done?
So first, I guess you'll have to assign the button an ID.
Right. So, okay, so if you had to assign an ID or a class, that would have to be done in HTML, right? So currently, we haven't assigned anything to that button, and we want to make it work just like it was before when we assigned the ID. So number one thing would be to get hold of this element. That would be the first thing.
Okay.
So how do I get hold of that button? Any ideas?
I will again say document get element ID. We would use that.
Correct. Document dot. We can't use get element ID because we don't have an ID. So we're going to use simply query selector.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're just going to tell this query that any button attribute that appears on that page, just get that. Okay. And also we will say,
buttons.
Yeah, it could be more than one button, but basically this is just going to get you any button that's over there. And this time we're not changing the inner HTML, rather we're looking for the event. So we can directly say dot on click equals to, and then the name of my function, which is count. All right. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah. Just let me just copy it.
So let's see if this runs or not. Okay, it does not run. Why? Any idea?
So I guess the on part. No, wait, that's it. So I guess the function isn't called out properly. It should we add the parentheses at the end? You have to count.
So I honestly, I haven't really even changed anything over here. This remains as it is, the count function. But the only thing that we've done is
no,
we've
I mean the part. I mean in part where we write document dot query select button, and after that we write dot on click equals count. I guess our count will have to add the parentheses so that we can call out the function.
Oh, you mean to say I should add the parentheses here? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try. Let's try this and see what happens. Refresh page. No, it's not working. Okay, so here comes what you need to know. Like I told you that HTML is read from top to bottom, right? So now the number one problem is that your code is being executed way earlier than the screen is being drawn on. So when I'm telling the code that I want you to get any of the buttons and get the event listener for that button and run the function count, by the time this code runs, the HTML is not even drawn on the screen.
But sir, that runs only when we click button, right? And click the button when it's already drawn.
Yeah, but the problem is that the button is not drawn when this script is assigned and executed. The button is still to be drawn because that will only be drawn once the body statement is complete. So in order to counter this, we are going to use another method. And this method is document dot add event listener DOM content loaded and run the function count, for example. Okay, so this is something totally new and complex, but just hear me out here. So document is the same thing we've been using. There is a new method called add event listener. And in that method, we are calling DOM content loaded. What this is doing is that it's waiting for the screen to be drawn first and then calling upon the function called count.
With this.
Right, so it's a little tricky and a little complicated, but this is how it is. So we're trying something a little complex. You could have the same thing work by writing button equal, on click equals to and call the function. But now we're trying to understand a bit more of the functional programming. And in functional programming, the more you can modify without having to statically fix in the HTML content, the more flexible of a programmer you'll be. So this is something which you don't need to memorize, but with practice or with trying out these examples, I can share these files with you. You will basically understand how this whole model is working. So
where is this working?
Sorry?
This is working. What are you running?
Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, so what just happened? I saved the file, I refresh my browser, and as soon as I refresh my browser, this thing's incremented by 1. And there's no more click here increasing. What do you think? Why is it not working?
So when the DOM content was loaded, it just ran the function when it didn't appear another
Very
time.
good, very good. It directly ran the count function without having to actually check for the button element with the on-click event. That is exactly what happened. So I'm basically going to make another function, and I'm going to call it check button. Okay, this is my function. I'm just calling it check button. And in here, I'm going to basically do my query selector. And we're looking for what buttons, right? It's called all kinds of buttons, whatever you can find. And I'm looking for the on click event. And in result, I want this thing to run the count function. So one thing I'm going to have to change here is check button. Okay. So let's see if it works now. It's working. So much simpler when we had the on-click part here, but now you have more flexibility because at any point, what if you want to run more than one button's function? What if you had like more than one button doing some different things? So now you can very easily, while the program is running, modify things.
So, but if there are multiple buttons on the screen, how would we know that what button should run longer?
Okay, that's a good question. So if you have multiple elements on the screen with the same ID or name, then that's where the array comes into play, because then you can store all these items into an array, and the array can then be asked for to provide item number 1, item number 2, item number 3, and you can then counter all these different things.
Could you just explain this array again? I don't get what an array is, or how do you make it? How do you store stuff in it?
Right. So let me just modify this slightly a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. So okay, I'm gonna add just maybe one more h1 tag here. Call this one counter 2. So this is just for practice purposes. And yeah, so now if I want to do something on the fly, I just want to be able to do something different. Maybe like if the counter is running with one increment at a time, I could maybe do counter times 2 in the second counter. Right, so we got these 2 zeros. Spelled it wrong. Yeah, so 5 2s are 10, and so on and so on.
So why do you have counter 2?
No, I was just showing you that on the fly, you can add more functions as you're going. Within a function, you can have more instructions, and you can manipulate data as you go on the fly. Whereas
Okay.
if we were doing the regular button equals on click and function method, then you'd have to create another function for that button to be able to execute a different sort of counter. Okay, so okay, so is this clear now?
Yeah.
Take a screenshot of this if you can. Oh, it's
So
already.
what about the array?
You mean the array example? Did we not do that in the last class?
No, sir.
Where I think we did do that in the last class. But anyways, I'll show you what I mean by that. So we got like a couple of elements here. So I got like an okay, so I got a few h2 tags here now. Hello. So we got 2 h2 tags. And we use the query selector to get the h2 tags, or change them basically.
Sir, for the second counter, we didn't assign the counter must be 0 at the beginning, yet it is 0.
I'm sorry, what's that again?
For the second counter which we added over there for the h1, we never assigned that counter 2 should be initially 0, but it was already 0.
No, because we're using the same variable for both the counters. we're only working with
Oh,
one.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're manipulating it on the fly. So in the code only, I'm saying counter times 2. So whatever value of counter is, it's just multiplying it by 2 and displaying the result.
Okay.
Okay, so all right. So the next thing which I wanted to do with you, basically in the class, was wanted to work whereby we can have a couple of buttons on the screen, and the buttons would change or do something to the code that's on the page. So wait a second. All right, so hello world. Let me just put that in H1 again. I'm calling this one hello. Okay, I got the click here buttons, but I would like to have a few more buttons here. Okay, this time I'm just gonna give my buttons some IDs for simplicity's sake. Right, so I got 3 buttons over here, and all 3 buttons are having the color red, green, and blue. Right. So what I really want to do is when I click on red, I'd like the hello to change to red. Similarly with green, it should change to green, and blue, it should change to blue. So any ideas how we can go about this?
We have assigned IDs to the button, that's fine. And now we go to
Yes.
the JavaScript.
Yes.
And I guess we have to assign a function, another function for this.
Right. So 2 things we need to take care of. Number 1 being the event listener, because there is no on-click event over there. We have not specified. We have only provided IDs, right?
Okay.
If you want to do it the other way,
Yeah.
if you want to do it with on-click, obviously you can just specify the function that you want to run here, right? That would be the most easiest way of doing it. Obviously, it will still run, but just to understand functional programming, we are not going to do a lot of coding over here. So we've just assigned IDs over here to the buttons. Now, what we really want to do is we want to do 2 things: capture the button's event listener, and then perform a function to change the style, the CSS style of that button, of the hello text in H1. All right.
So we would be using document.add-event-listener.
Yeah. So we've already got a DOM content loaded over here, which is going to execute a function called check button. So we've already programmed that just a few moments ago. So all we have to do now is we'll need to look for the button event listeners, right? So I'm going to first of all look for the red button.
So won't we be using the get element by ID because we have an ID assigned?
You could use get element by ID as well. It will still work, yes. But I'm still using query selector. And both ways it can work. You can try it out. Okay, so on click event, and what I'd really wanted to do is run a function called red. And just define a little function here called red. Okay, so what needs to be done in the function? Sorry. Have a look at the HTML code for a minute and tell me what you think needs to be done.
Okay, first the H1 needs to be identified by the ID.
Yeah.
And then we somehow have to change its properties to the color red.
Very good. So in the function red, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to use document.query selector. And I'm looking for, so I need to get hold of that H1, right? And the ID of that H1 is, it's hello, right?
Yeah.
Right. So hello, and this time I don't want the inner HTML to change. Rather, I want the CSS style to change. So for that, we have the properties.style.color, and in quotations, we can specify the color. Okay, and then I have to do the same for green. I'm just going to copy this code. Run a function green once the green button's event listener on click event. Similarly, run a function called blue when there is an on click event. And I will simply just create more copies of this function, which I created.
So what is check button function doing?
Sorry, what's that?
What is the function check button doing actually?
The function check button. Okay, so check button is basically a name of a function, which I'm using to inform the DOM content loader at the time when the add event listener is running, that as you listen to any event, you should go and look for further clarification of what that event is. So in the check button function, I'm looking for button events. Most likely they're on all of them are on click events, red, green, blue. And once those events are triggered, the function that corresponds to those events is called upon. And if I do not want to specify the check button, I could write the code directly over here without having to have functions. But you see, with programming, the target of a programmer is to make sure that there is a lot of neatness in the work, a lot of clarity in the work. So if I were to just write everything in one go without having to define functions, just write the different codes and just do it in one block, for example, it would be hard for you to understand. It would be hard for anybody to understand what exactly the programming is doing. So having functions makes your life easier, and obviously your code becomes more modular. So there are different modules which you can, if you wanted to alter something, you could just go into that particular module and alter it, rather than having to read the code in one big block and then modify it. Okay, let's see if this works. Now I'm going to save it. I'll refresh my page. So my counter is still running. Red, green, blue. Yeah, so red, green, blue. Yeah, those buttons are now working fine. And so yeah, I mean, I was thinking, let's do a little bit of, let's make this a little bit more neat. So let's just add a CSS file here to make our work look a little bit more neater. I think I might have a CSS file already. Maybe I can just apply that to this one. Oh, great. Dreamweaver. No, expression wave. Where did this come from? Did Sublime just go away or something?